Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started. So can I please have everybody's attention? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our 10th CLI Club. Welcome to our new guests and our older club members, so to speak. We've got a real exciting, in my opinion, agenda this evening. This will, again, be our 10th, and it will be our final club meeting of this year. We're going to start off here in just a few minutes in a little bit different fashion. I want to get right into our event. We'll do our housekeeping more at the end because I want to get started with our event at this particular time. You can see the agenda. Number one, we're going to be presenting a Georgetown team approach to limb salvage. This is a healthcare event, yet many non-healthcare providers are here because this is about community. This is about how do we make everybody aware in our community, and we're going to have a great speaker from Georgetown, Dr. John Steinberg, address this. We're going to do something we haven't done at this point this year. We're going to connect the heart and the legs. That's what we're going to do from the vascular standpoint. Dr. Pat Lowell will give that talk, and then we're going to have a Spectrum update. For those who have not been here before, Spectrum is a new technology that we're hoping that's going to be a disruptive technology in healthcare that we're going to bring to this community, to Acadiana. This is about what can we do for our entire community. And then the most important thing we're going to do this evening is we're going to honor with a CLI Club Lifetime Achievement honoree, Red Laurel. Guys, Red Laurel. So this is our club. Welcome to our club. When putting together Red's presentation, I ran into multiple sources of things that we can use that would showcase what a community leader he has been. We're going to get into that in 1 minute, and then we will go from there. I'm going to ask Pastor Jacob Aranza, who has been our spiritual leader in the club, and many in this room. This is part of the community also. We're going to ask him to say a prayer, a benediction, and to give us a little bit of his thoughts. Then we're going to get started with our award. Pastor Jacob Aranza.
It's been said success is what you do for yourself and your family, but significance is what you leave for others. It's also been said that legacy is a future without you, still influenced by you. Every one of us here want to make a significant difference in people's lives. As a spiritual leader, I hope one day to be able to say a significant impact has been made in our community when I think of men like Monsignor Segura, Dr. Perry Sanders, Pastor Bob King. Those are men who have been spiritual leaders along with many others who have served our community for years. And every great community is made of men just like that. But when it comes to the area of health and fitness, there is only one name that can be named, that long after he's gone, though his greatest achievement, many would have thought, was in 1960, for the next 50 years, he has left a legacy that will continue long after he's gone, and that is Red Laurel. Red, there are many strong men, there are many good men, and there are many godly men. But there are very few men that are all three of those and who continued in the legacy that you have. Today, we thank God for you. We thank God for your influence in this community, and we thank God for the legacy that you built and that will continue many, 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 many years long after you and I are gone. Shall we pray? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your faithfulness. We have been voted the happiest city in America, but indeed, we are the most blessed city in America because it is amazing individuals and families that you planted here who have left a legacy for our children and our grandchildren to build on. Indeed, our land is blessed with many wonderful and abundant gifts, but when you give gifts, you wrap them up in flesh and blood. You did that when you gave us your Son, and you do that every time you give us one of your sons and daughters to bless a community. Today, we celebrate the very gift that you've given this community called Red Laurel, and we honor you knowing that it is your very gift in your very hand that have entrusted him to us before the foundations of the world. We ask you to bless our food and our time together. May you be honored and may you be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Real quickly, I want to thank the board of directors of our club. This is a nonprofit organization. We have David Abraham, we have Keith Kishbaugh, we have Jared Leger. They are our board of directors. They are here. Each of them are involved in this community. Thank you guys for your work in our community. I want to make an announcement. This will be our final club meeting of the year of 2019. We will have had 10 clubs and we will have seated over 5,000 attendees. Guys, it's been a great ride, and I want to thank everybody for coming in the past and tonight. I want you to look real quickly. This will be our next club meeting, which will be in January of 2020. And you can see our Achievement Award winner there will be Dr. Kip Schumacher, who is here tonight also, the founder and the leader of one of the largest, if not the largest, emergency room physician groups in the country from here. Dr. Kip Schumacher, we will be honoring him with a Lifetime Achievement in January of 2020. At that same event, we will bring in John Rady, who is also a doctor, and he wrote a best-selling book, Spark. If you guys have not heard of it, Google it, look at it, read it. I did it. It's about revolutionary new science of what he calls exercise in the brain. Red Laurel has been doing this his entire life. I've tried to stay in shape too, and as I've read this, it makes an awful lot of sense. And so he's connecting things that are going to be very important from that standpoint. We will learn about that in January and really how it can be used not only in an older age, but why we need to do this better for our younger kids. We need more exercise, and that's what this is about. He will give a unique presentation in January, and everybody is invited. Ladies and gentlemen, when putting this together for Red Laurel, I put together a non-professional presentation. That's me. I found a couple of very professional videos that were excellent. I went into this thinking I was going to make one presentation in which I was going to splice things. When it came down to it, I learned more about myself, this community, and I said we're going to do them both. So with no further ado, I want to show a video on Red Laurel, and I will continue after. Roll it, please.
Born in Harvey, Louisiana in 1936, Lloyd Red Laurel decided early on that he would one day become Mr. America. At age 7, he hung a picture of Mr. America on his wall to remind him of his goal.
As he does with all his big goals, he puts a picture up and he forces himself to achieve those goals. But he put a picture of Mr. America up and said, one day I'm going to have my picture on that wall.
In high school, Red got a set of weights, joined the wrestling team, and established a legacy at Holy Cross School, gathering 3 state championships in wrestling. After graduation, he joined the Navy, where he continued as a championship bodybuilder and wrestler. Red never stopped lifting weights and competing as a bodybuilder. Along the way, he became friends with fellow bodybuilder Mike Stansberry, who offered Red a job in 1958, managing his health club in Lafayette. The following year, Stansberry closed his club, allowing Red to focus on his longtime goal. And in 1960, he became Mr. America. With trophies in hand, he soon returned to Lafayette, married his sweetheart Emma Davis, and opened a health club of his own, Red Laurel's Health Studio.
He
tells a little story many times, and it's one I always remember, that when he came to Lafayette, he found a little part of heaven.
I live in a community that's very health conscious, and probably the main reason for that is because there's a guy there that started a health club 50 years ago.
I mean, there's not very many towns in the country, I think, that can be like Lafayette. And a big part of that is because of Red Laurels.
We are a part of the community, not just a place to go and exercise.
The difference between other health clubs and this health club is Red, period. He works harder than anybody else. I've never seen anybody work so hard.
A man who's 75 plus, who can wake up at 2:30 in the morning, come and have a full workout, ride a bike, go to Mass, end up at the airport, fly his airplane, and be back to work for 9 o'clock, that's pretty inspiring.
I can remember when I was a kid, every morning when he'd come into Reds, he'd go to the basketball gym and do a handstand every morning, every morning.
He would never sit behind a closed door, and I think that that's a lot of what makes Reds different.
When you come to Reds, you're going to see Red Laurel, whether it's at 3 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night.
He says hello and goodbye to everyone who walks in the door. Red's just there.
He will lead by example, and he's not going to ask you of something to do if he doesn't do it himself.
We enjoyed working here, we enjoyed working for him, and so we didn't want to leave. We wanted to stay. Can we please stay and work in the towel room? Who does that? Who wants to do that?
The passion that he shows towards his job is contagious.
And he was never too proud to do anything, whether it be cleaning the toilet, picking up trash.
And it should read on his epitaph, if there's time to lean, there's time to clean.
Red is not happy unless he's knocking walls down.
I think in this building, there's maybe one wall that's left from his original building. Everything else has been expanded on.
And then he built this huge swimming pool, well, the lap pool that we have now. The night before it was going to open, they were filling the pool up, and we got permission to actually go out and swim.
Lo and behold, I figured out that you could jump off the roof into the old swimming pool, like Acapulco cliff diving. Unfortunately, Red happened to be driving down the road at 11 o'clock at night.
And Stanley looks on top and he says, "Dad, I think somebody's jumping off the roof." So I got fired. We all got fired that night.
Actually, he fired Carla, and so we begged him not to fire her, because she actually did tell us not to be jumping off the roof, but we didn't listen.
He calmed down and we all got rehired. We all got rehired, thank goodness.
A couple of days later, I was standing by the swimming pool lifeguarding, and a friend of mine is talking to me, and he said, "Hey, you been playing any tennis lately?" And he walked by at the exact moment that he asked me that had I been playing tennis, and said, "No, he's been working on his diving, though."
I can remember one time we made a big addition, and I said, "Red, I guess this will be the last big addition." And he gave me a look, and he said, "I guess you won't be staying here very long." And it has never stopped.
He could have retired so long ago, and he won't. He won't retire.
This is not a job for him. This is his life. This is what he does, and he just loves it.
His obituary, it's going to say he has now retired.
I think what he really does for the community is he loves this community.
He also loves his bicycles, and he loves his automobiles, and he loves his airplanes, and he loves his children, and he loves Lafayette, Louisiana. He is a most genuine, caring, and giving person as you will find.
I think the way he gives back, he never says no. I don't think no's in his vocabulary.
I went up there the other day to talk to Connie, and someone was asking for a donation or whatever, and she pulls out this book, and it's about this big. I'm like, "What is that?" And she goes, "That's our donation book."
If he can help out in the community in any way, he does it the best he can.
We support every athletic event, anywhere around, any fun run, every little kid who walks in the door who's selling raffle tickets for their football team.
He will always help whoever is asking.
He supports UL wholeheartedly. He supports all of the other educational institutions here in Lafayette and the surrounding areas. As a matter of fact, Reds has donated athletic equipment to my school, and I'm sure many other schools in this area too.
And there are a lot of things we don't know that he does, and I think he likes to kind of keep that kind of quiet.
I was talking to someone the other day, and she said, "Do you think Mr. Laurel would and I forget what the question was. I said, here's what you do. Call Reds, ask to speak to Red Laurel, and before you finish your question, he will say yes.
There's so many opportunities out there to give, and he just says yes.
He cares about the members, he cares about the facility, he cares about the success of not only our health club, but of Lafayette.
But his absolute greatest contribution to the community is what he's done by bringing in so many kids to work here over the years.
We've had thousands of employees come through the doors here.
The number of people that have come through these doors as employees, the training opportunities that they've had, has created some really good, solid community members.
People leave here with incredible work ethics.
And we always hope that the kids move on to better things. You know, we always want them to improve. And it might be here, or it might be at another job somewhere else.
We see them as doctors and lawyers and from every walk of life. And I really believe that Red had that influence on them to give them that drive to accomplish those goals.
He made us feel like this was our place, too. It wasn't just Red Laurel's, it was ours.
And I can guarantee you that every single one of us, when there's some opportunity or some challenge comes into their life, says, what would Red do?
Congratulations to Red Laurel.
Guys, what can I say? Wonderful. That's the professional version. I'm going to give you my personal version. As I thought about things, you will see my 30-year experience. I learned a lot about myself, about what Red has been to me, to my life. And I ask a question. How many people in here have been a member of Reds, been to Reds, a family member, been to Reds through the years? Can I see a show of hands? Every hand is raised. Every hand is raised. We had a UL, University of Louisiana, Lafayette, meeting the last time. 90% of that room, they weren't 100%. Red, congratulations. I ask every one of you to think of something special about what Red has meant. Take a little bit of time, because that's what I did as I put this together for Red. What were the early influences of Red? You guys may not have heard of Bill Pearl. That's Bill Pearl. I knew of Bill Pearl. I'm younger than Red, but I one time thought I was going to be a bodybuilder. My brother did. So I have a little bit of connection Red doesn't know about. This was his hero. This was a Mr. America. Now we're talking about in the 40s, 50s, 60s. He met Bill Pearl and Joe Gold. This is the starter of Gold's Gym and maybe the father of fitness. These were his influences. This is who he grew up wanting to be like, as I understand it. This is Joe Gold. That is Franco Columbo, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Frank Zane. Red don't know this, but in 1970, I went to Muscle Beach myself as a young guy and met these guys. Franco Columbo was a chiropractor afterwards, and he passed away a few years ago. These were the legends. This predated Red, or excuse me, came right after Red. So let's talk about the achievements that we know. 1955, Mr. New Orleans. 58, Mr. Armed Forces. These were the real things. Mr. Hawaii, Mr. East Coast. This is Red Laurel in the 50s. 1959, Mr. Dixie. 1960, he achieved his dream, and that was as a Mr. America. There is the famous Red Laurel Mr. America pose, and in 2060, in his weight class, a Mr. Universe in London. These are tremendous achievements. We go for 20-some years, 30 years. He did his Red Laurel's Health Club. We'll get into that. All of a sudden, we start seeing these kind of achievements. General Studies, he graduated. He went back to UL. He is a Raging Cajun. He has that degree. 2002, ULL Outstanding Alumni Award. This is what Red has achieved. Alumni Honorary for Community Service and University Support, 2011. Red became recognized. 2011, he became the City Club Lifetime Achievement Award. Now, you guys don't know this, but the club industry is their industry's most significant award. This is held by only a few people, and this came from Joe Gold, and this is the premier of industry in fitness. Red Laurel was their Lifetime Achievement Award in 2011. This is a very major award. 2013 Civic Club Award here in town. 2016 Honorary Doctorate degree, Red Laurel, University of Louisiana. Guys, these are real achievements. He was given an honorary doctorate. So what happened in the 60s? Guys go to Red Laurel's. I can't walk up and down the hallway without seeing these. This is the documentation of Red Laurel's from 1963. And I will tell you, I just spoke to Chuck Boudreau, and he tells me his mother was one of your first clients, and he remembers the little spot there in 1963. And everybody think, you're going to think of something that Red Laurel's affected your life. In the 70s, I was around but not here. This was Red Laurel's in the 70s, building community. Hey, we had some other guys here. Anybody recognize these guys from the 70s? What do you think, guys? Here is our Red Laurel staff. Here's 20 to 30 years ago. They're still there. What happened in the 80s? Well, aerobics, Red Laurel, community. Everybody know this gentleman. Red Laurel's in the 90s. This is when I came to town. I got to know Red a little bit about there, and I'm going to tell you some history that affected me. You guys recognize anybody there? You see that top spot up there? I used to run that every morning at 5 o'clock with Dennis Vetrella, who is in this audience. And back then, we made some decisions and some things on that track that changed healthcare. We actually came up with the name of a meeting in Red Laurel's steam room that changed healthcare. This is the new Cardiovascular Horizons event that we popularized years ago that led to the CLI, the first CLI summit. Now that's the thread here of what we do, critical limb ischemia. Little known that out of Red Laurel's came the mind power, if you want to call it that, from us to lead up to where we are today. The first international critical limb ischemia summit ever was held because of things that was started at New Cardiovascular Horizons. And I want you to see that name right there. That is John Steinberg, who was at that meeting. He was a member of the very first CLI event. For you guys not in healthcare, CLI has not been around forever. This is a term for critical limb ischemia of the leg, and I find myself connected to Red Laurel's when we're talking about that, even in our business. How much further was I connected? Well, my name started with an A. So when these badges came out, I think I had the biggest family badge bunch in the whole place, so I got the first one of these, okay, when those came out. Now, what I can tell you is that was in the early 90s, and if I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble there. If I look at my car this week, you can see I carry still a red Laurels. This is my daughter, 13. That's her first date. That's me. That was recent. That's my first date in a long time, too, also, guys. If you look in my hand, you see red Laurels. That was by accident. I can just tell you, to this day, it affects me every single day. So what about the 2000s? Again, growth, red Laurels, history. You can see it on the wall every time you walk into red Laurels, and I always go slow when I walk there. Guys, January 13th, 2013, Red's at its 50th anniversary. 50-year anniversary, red Laurels. That's the single business, and now we're 7 years later. Here you can see to begin with, here we are now. You walk in today, you see the most magnificent healthcare facility, in my opinion, in the world. I've been around. I've never seen anything like this. You guys know me. I live 1 block from red Laurels. That's not an accident. I've lived the last 20 years 1 block from red Laurels. It means that much to me. So what is this club? 57 years, iconic Lafayette Health Club. People around the world know of this. Red, you don't know this, but one time about 10 years ago, I considered leaving Lafayette for a different job. And when I was making that decision, among the top 2 things that kept me in this town was red Laurels. I'm serious. And I've talked to other people. It is that important. It is that important to people's life. I'm telling you. There's your invitation for 50 years. We have between 16 and 20,000 members of red Laurels at any one time. That's as high as 13 to 15% of the population around here is a member of red Laurels in some particular fashion. I took a picture of that because I think that's the most popular place that you can put your card. Red Laurels. Mine's been there many times. Everybody will remember that. Everybody passes it. I don't pass it anymore. This is the legacy. 200,000 square feet at this time. 200,000 square feet. Keeps growing. You saw about his walls. Over 250 employees at this moment. How many thousands through the years? Red Laurels. Employees. I could be here forever. These are just some of them. Some of them are here. Many of these people I know. Many of the people know here. Honor yourselves. Look at the smiles. Every single one of them. I could have an interaction. Just said hello to Robbie. I remember the day he started, he took care of my little kids at the swimming pool. It's been a part of my life. I remember Eugene. I remember all of these things. And I think most people here will do that too if you take a second and think how important red Laurel has been to your life. Nobody else that I know of can I say that about. This is Red. This is his legacy. Look at the smiles. That was a couple of days ago. You guys may not know this. Red made all his equipment to begin with. Maybe at that time there was no other equipment. You guys don't know, but he has been instrumental in the development of all new technologies. First aerobics class in this area done right here. Now I can remember, there we go. Red, you don't know this, but I was an aerobics instructor myself a long time ago. So this meant something to me. I'm serious. Red, it may be, okay. Guys, I believe he purchased the first Nautilus machine, the first Body Master, and the first spinner bikes. Why? Because he was connected to industry. They came to him. He visited places. I'm talking about things that were the first in the country. These things came to us. We took them for granted. That's what Red Laurel did. You guys know about the Borden's Ice Cream Shop legacy? If not, we're going to tell you a little bit about it. 1940, the original one was constructed. Everybody knows Borden's. 2009, it was purchased by Red and his family from the UL Foundation, and his daughter, Kaki, runs it now. This was in jeopardy of losing. It was the last Borden's in existence and is the last remaining Borden's in this country. History, lives have been changed through Borden's. And I will get to you. Go ahead, and you guys who are fans of Borden's, it's the old school. It is our community. It's Lafayette. I'm telling you, community things here. This is not medicine. This is not necessarily fitness. This is the community, what Red has done. You guys ever seen this? This is his tips for success. If you haven't seen it, here you go. Arrive on time and ready to work. Anything wrong with that? What a great tip. I wish I get it in my office every day. What a great tip. Say hello and goodbye. How simple. Do we do it every day? No. Should we? Yes. Red, I'm going to be saying more hellos and goodbyes at this point. This is a great tip. All of it. Take it home. Make a change every month. Well, that's a great thing. In Red says sometimes a change can be either way. Sometimes you make a change every day. That's not good. But I can tell you, he's done something positive every month. I think it's a goal that he has set. Learn as much as you can. You know how powerful those words are? That's why everybody's sitting here tonight. Okay, you take it for granted, but you're going to learn something tonight that you wouldn't have learned if you didn't come. This is about community. This is about the things that are Red's tips. Stay in shape. How can you beat that? So, guys, these are simple, yet these are so powerful tips. This is the way this man's lived his life, and frankly, everybody around him. This is Red Laurel. I wish I had those arms. I don't know if you guys know, we have a war hero here also. Red served in the U.S. Navy. Go Navy. We have some Navy people. 1955 to 1959. I think this is one of the proudest pictures that Red has, and I think this is wonderful, and I'm going to salute the service, and you're going to see how. Red was a submariner. Red doesn't know this, but I have a connection with submarines too that I will tell him about one of these days when we have time. Guys, we're going to have something that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. This is the Veterans First. This is a special certificate that is given by the Louisiana Economic Development Department for veterans who own business. Relatively new. We're going to talk more about it. Go Navy. Guys, this is Red Laurel. I want to salute our veterans. How many veterans do we have here in the audience today? Raise your hand. Guys, we honored Dr. Kenshin in the VA several months ago. I'm going to now show a little personal side of myself because I'm going to say that that gentleman there on the left, the taller of the gentlemen, that is my father. This was in 1942. He served in the Army, and he served in the war. When I grew up, this is what I saw in my house, and I didn't even know what it was. He was a war hero, and he was a real war hero and a veteran. And this is the sword from the Supreme Commander of the Philippines that hung in my house, and I really didn't know much about it. That is my mother and my father. My mother met my father at Borden's in Logan, West Virginia. In Logan, West Virginia, this is where my mother met my father after the war in 1950. That is my father today at 94. He is alive. That is my daughter, and that's me with, frankly, a Marshall jacket that was exactly 50 years old. That's my Letterman's jacket when I played at Marshall, and that's my father, 94. So salute to the veterans. Guys, what about Red and his toys? That's also a legacy. Bikes, cycles, they cycle across the country. I offered this achievement award to Red months ago. He's the first man I thought of. He said, Doc, me and my wife, we're going to motorcycle across the country. We're going to the Dakotas. That's what they do. He still does that. And we had to wait until this moment to be able to honor Red. Autos, whether they be red, white, blue Lamborghinis, he's known for that. Planes, guys, who has their own 5 handmade airplanes? Red Laurel. This is a life well lived. Family, this is his wife, Miss Emma. Red is a family man to no end. As I understand it, these two beautiful people were set up on a blind date This was back in about 1963, as I understand. They've been married ever since, and we're talking about 57 years almost at this moment for Red and Emma. Rest of his family, Mark, works right there managing with his dad. I think I remember Mark when he ran around, he was about 15 years old back then. I've been here over 30 years. Khaki, owning at this moment Borden's Ice Cream. Again, the Laurel family in this particular community. This is Red. This is his daughter Christine or Tina. She's a substance abuse counselor. And son Stanley is the owner of the Corner Bar. All of these are members of our community, and this is Red, accepting his ULL honorary doctorate or PhD degree. So guys, here's his entire family, and what a family, what a beautiful family, Red. So Red the man, what is this legacy? Community. Community. When I think of this community, I think of Red Laurel. He is the face of everything good about this community. Character, Christianity, commitment, these are the things that he's done every day at this work, and it has blended and it has affected many, many people, and people are better off having come through Red Laurel's. Community again. Charity, compassion. He's a Cajun. Nothing wrong with these C's. He's a raging Cajun, and he's a champion. Frankly, he's a champion of our community. And guys, for that reason, this is why we're honoring Red Laurel as our Achievement Award. So family, hero, Mr. America, everybody here, please rise. Let's honor our CLI Club Achievement Award winner, Red Laurel. Ragu. Red, please come up. We have a presentation. We're going to take a couple of pictures. Then we're going to continue on. Guys, as Red comes up to say a few words, I'm going to introduce Julie Calzone from the Louisiana, the LED. She has a presentation that will be news to Red, and this will be the first announcement.
Come here, Red. Coming. So first of all, you heard how Red was served in the Navy. Just so you know, I was raised by 2 Navy officers, and I have the distinct privilege this evening from the great state of Louisiana to give you this certificate which recognizes you as a Louisiana veteran-owned business. This comes from the state legislature, the governor of Louisiana, the Secretary for Economic Development, and the Secretary for Louisiana Veteran Affairs. Congratulations and welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you, don't need glasses.
I need glasses.
Only if I want to see. I really had planned to talk. I planned to do something, say a few words, but I don't think he left anything out. That is the best commercial I've ever heard in my life. In fact, and I want to thank all the hands that went up, were members at one time. That was impressive. And I am honored to be here. This is quite an honor for me. But the best thing of all of this was coming to Lafayette. And Myrna mentioned something about when I landed here on Trans-Texas Airlines, 1959, September 9th. I didn't realize that day I'd stepped off in heaven. It is just the greatest place in the world to live. But with this commercial, I'm sure I'm going to have to go to work tonight to sell a few more memberships and keep things going. But this morning, I do have a little, he mentioned my little hints, and the first one is to show up on time, ready to work. And you got to add a few things to that, like passion. This morning, I went to Mass, and at the same time, a bus stopped, school bus. And there's a whole bunch of little kids, I guess, early, no kindergarten, but maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And they were running to go to the bus, and they were going to work. That's their work day. I wish everybody was that passionate about their job as those kids were. And I want to be a kid again and go run to the bus. But right now, I'm going to go run and eat. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was very nice. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Red Laurel. So beloved, so beloved. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to proceed on to now, and we're going to be having a real treat here. Is we're going to have presenting Dr. John Steinberg, who's going to talk to us today, and he's going to tell us about his work in limb salvage. John is one of the most noted podiatrists in this country, and he is a friend. You saw that we go back ourselves over 20 years. I knew him almost as a resident, and he has taken the Georgetown program to high levels. As a matter of fact, John himself was given a Lifetime Achievement Award within the last month with the Diabetic Foot Conference of the year. So John is an excellent clinician and speaker and friend, one of the most sought-after speakers internationally in podiatry. He has touched several podiatrists in this audience, and we go back a long way. John, I'm going to ask you to come to the podium if you could, but I'm also going to ask another thing as we make the change here. Guys, we have any Houston Astro fans in here? Houston Astros. Guys, Dr. John Steinberg is the #1 Washington Nationals fan in the country. Do you know who those guys are? They beat us in the World Series. So John is a baseball fan. John, I present to you the Washington Nats hat. Go Washington. John Steinberg, Georgetown University. John, welcome to Lafayette.
Thanks, man. Thank you, brother.
Spectacular, spectacular. Well, what a special night, and what a wonderful group of people in this room. I got to meet several of you during the reception, and I want to meet the rest of you before we leave, so make sure to keep some time for me before you leave. I didn't shake your hand yet. But what a unique night, and what a neat sense of community that me as coming in from the crazy town of Washington, D.C., you can just feel it in the room, and this is really neat. So David, congratulations on what you've created here with your team. So as David mentioned in my intro, we have known each other for quite a while. and we've helped innovate some really neat new technologies that have truly made a difference in people's lives and have hopefully prevented a lot of amputations around this country and around the world. Can I see a show of hands of how many of you are in healthcare as your profession? All right, so the people with your hands up right now are really going to take this in stride and do really well. The folks without your hands up right now, finish up your dinner really, really quick. Because I'm going to hit you hard with this talk. I'm not holding any punches. I didn't make a non-medical person talk for this evening, because honestly, I think the pictures are important. I'm not showing you pictures to gross you out. I'm not showing you medical stuff because I think it's cool to try and make someone who's not in the profession see this stuff. But if blood and stuff bothers you, just look away when the videos pop up. We'll take good care of you. It's all right. Just focus on the chocolate cake. So, as David mentioned, I was aware there would be a few Astros fans in the room. I'm so shocked. But it was a great year to be a Washington Nationals baseball fan. And I'll tell you, in August, things were still not looking so good for the Nationals. You know, we started off at 14-31 in the early season. It was completely a fairy tale story that we ended up in the World Series, and then even more so to win the World Series. But I'll tell you, in August, I made a trip to Vegas. And I walked past a sports book, and I said, you know, I usually try to put a bet on the Nationals just for the heck of it. But I said, man, that's really hard this year. Nothing's going to happen. But I went ahead and put $10 on the Washington Nationals to win the World Series in August of this summer, and it was 20-to-1 odds. So I won $210. And my son, who for a second was really proud, he's 16 years old and plays high school ball, he said, Dad, that's really awesome, but why didn't you put $1,000 down? I said, because $1,000 would have been really, really stupid in August. $10 was stupid enough. But anyway, it worked out. So Dennis Petrella had mentioned to me that there's perhaps just a few Saints fans in the room, so I want to say my next trip to Vegas, I'm going to put $10 on the Saints, and I'm going to root for you. So carry it all the way so I can cash in on this. I'm not going $1,000 though, just for the record. As is tradition with any medical talk, my disclosure is just so you know what my relationships are for industry. We do research, and I'm a consultant for Integra, Organogenesis, and KCI, all companies that help innovate in wound care. At Georgetown, I've been there since 2004. It's a really, really unique place. And I would tell you, one of the things I love about Georgetown is that the culture there embraces the fact that we are human and that we're not perfect. And we start every meeting, every conference, with what we call a safety moment. And I want to share with you just two of those, just particularly for those who don't work in healthcare, so you can get a glimpse of how complex this human story of healthcare is. And I don't give you this to discredit mistakes that shouldn't be made, but I want you to understand how this works and how well-intentioned healthcare can be, but still have so many problems. This is a photograph of a patient's arm with an IV in it, and you can see there's 4 bracelets on there. This is a recent innovation in healthcare that when someone checks into the hospital, many of you have been patients, you get a bracelet strapped onto your wrist that of course probably has your name and date of birth and a record number on it. But now, with all this increased concern for safety, we have a rainbow display of bracelets that go on for allergies and recent surgeries or other complications or sleep apnea or fall risk or no consent able to be obtained for the patient. Or as you can see in here, this particular bracelet says no BP or venipuncture. That means you should never stick an IV in this person's arm. Right next to that bracelet is an IV that's stuck into this patient's arm. We discovered that in the operating room during the procedure and removed the IV and moved it to the other arm. But the reason I show you this is it's getting so complex now, and we have all these well-intentioned safety measures, but people fatigue on it because every one of my patients has 4, 5, 6, 7 bracelets on their arm, so no one looks anymore. So our system is looking at that to say, hey, let's rethink this whole thing about strapping so many bracelets on patients' arms and find better ways to make sure people don't put an IV in the wrong arm. Another example that hits closer to home because it was in my operating room is a patient that came into our team, 52-year-old male, very similar story for what we run. We have 40, 50 patients on our service in Georgetown Hospital at any given week. And this patient was admitted for terrible wounds and bad critical limb ischemia, needed the whole limb salvage team spooled into the action. And my partner, Dr. Addinger, who's a plastic surgeon, did the first procedure, and unfortunately the patient had to have partial amputation of 3 of his toes. He's paraplegic, does not walk anymore, but we want to give this patient the same care that you would give to anyone, whether they're walking or not walking. And in that respect, I went and talked with him on Friday after his partial toe amputation was done, and I said, hey, the best way to keep you in a shoe and keep you from having yet another ulcer is, as part of your closure, we're going to amputate your other 2 toes. Do I have your permission for that? And he said, yes. That makes sense to me. You're going to even up my foot. I don't want to have just these 2 non-functional toes sitting out there if I'm losing my other 3. Dr. Steinberg, you have my permission for that. So we came, he signed the consent form, everything looks good. Surgery's not till Monday. Over the weekend, he changed his mind. So we go, I see him Monday morning, unaware of his change in heart about not having his other 2 toes amputated. We do a brief pre-op discussion. I sign all the paperwork. We have a checklist in the operating room. Thank goodness, as part of that checklist in the operating room, which didn't exist a few years ago, but it's similar to what a pilot would do when it's time for takeoff on your airplane. I don't think any one of you would want to be on the plane where the pilot decides that he or she is good enough to skip the checklist. Bad idea. A lot of surgeons still don't follow this checklist, but it's becoming more and more common because we've realized it catches errors like the one that this checklist caught. And during the readback of the consent form, we realized this patient changed his mind over the weekend and did not want his remaining toes amputated, just wanted the wound cleared and closed, and we did that. But if it weren't for the checklist or these kind of safety measures that we have in place in medicine, and mind you, this is one of 10 surgeries I did that day, I was focused on what the patient and I had discussed on Friday, where he said, take off all the toes. That's what was my intent when I walked in that operating room. And if we had not taken the time to read back the words on this consent form, we would have done the wrong procedure on the wrong patient. And that horrifies me, because you hear these stories about wrong-sided surgery, and you would think that could never happen to me. And it almost did. So the anatomy of how this can work in healthcare, and I use this as an intro because this tells you how complicated limb salvage is, because you've got so many team members and so many moving parts to this puzzle. With multiple attendings and residents seeing the patient over the weekend, you got the gap from Friday to Monday. You got the fact that we have part of the record on electronic computer versus the other part that's still written on paper. And then the key error was just the fact that that consent form didn't get specifically re-reviewed with the patient. Atul Gawande, who's one of the surgeons at Harvard who actually really promoted this use of the checklist system, said a really important quote. He said, "We hire, train, and pay doctors to be cowboys, but it's pit crews that we need." Diabetic limb salvage and critical limb ischemia is the epitome of pit crews. Because if David Ali and myself and the rest of the healthcare team members in the room aren't working together in concert, patients lose their legs. And they lose it because we're not getting the right care to the right patient quick enough. So here comes the gory stuff. This is my operating room not long ago, and this is a patient who's having their foot amputated. This is using a bovie at the level of the ankle, and you can see here in just a couple of seconds the foot's going to come off the leg. And while this is fascinating video to look at, it's a disgusting procedure to do as a surgeon, particularly in our situation, because our whole career and passion is to prevent this surgery. But when we don't get to patients soon enough, and their infection is too severe, and their blood flow can't be repaired, then this is the only option to save the patient's life. If the infection is that bad, it's got to come off. But there are so many things that lead up to this moment that could have gone differently. And that's why I use one of these favorite quotes from one of my mentors, Lawrence Harkless, who was here just a few months ago, from Thomas Campbell, says, "Coming events cast their shadows before." We knew, and the data shows us, that months and months and months before that amputation just happened that you saw on the video, there were things that could have been done differently or more aggressively that would have prevented this surgery. It's a fact. So if we look at epidemiology of amputation, 60% of all amputations in this country are because of diabetes. Up to 1 in 5 persons with diabetes that gets a hole in their foot or a sore or an ulceration ends up with an amputation instead of healing that wound. The final bullet point that I conveniently circled in red for you, 84% of lower extremity amputations in this country are preceded by a foot ulcer. This is where our effort needs to be. Anybody can do an amputation, but it takes a team to heal an ulcer and heal a wound and keep it healed, because you're dealing with mechanics, you're dealing with blood flow, you're dealing with infection, you're dealing with social environment. There are so many factors. It's a hard recipe to do, but it can be done. The literature of the reported risk factors for ulceration tells us that the facts and reasons someone will end up getting a hole in their foot from diabetes are listed for you in front of you. The ones in red can all be fixed by a multidisciplinary team approach to limb salvage. So we can take half of those risk factors off the table if we work together as surgeons and physicians and provider colleagues in the room. We can do this. We can fix vascular disease. We can fix their foot deformity. We can fix the hole in their foot and the ulceration. This is it's kind of the circle of destruction of the diabetic foot. And if you start at 9 o'clock, in a person who has neuropathy, meaning they've lost protective sensation, if they have high pressure from a foot deformity, and no one has a perfect foot, if you lose that nerve sensation, you get numbness in your foot and toes, now the simple, what would have been a callus, turns into an ulceration. And that ulceration in the face of poor blood flow turns into a non-healing infected wound that leads to an amputation. That is the circle of destruction in diabetes. It's really that simple, and it happens over and over again. This gray zone is where I, as a podiatrist, like to spend most of my time practicing of getting involved quick and early, because we can fix the foot deformity, we can address the bone pressure that's causing the callus, and we can remove the risk factor for the ulceration at the same time as the vascular specialist is improving their vascular disease. So here's an example of a patient that's just about to have a foot ulcer. This is just about this patient's first foot ulcer. And remember, 84% of amputations are preceded by an ulceration. And the problem with diabetes and neuropathy is that patients who have foot ulcerations, which normally without diabetes would be excruciatingly painful, feel no pain. And therefore they're not presenting to the operating room, they're not presenting to the emergency room, they're not presenting to their physician's office, they're not going in because they don't feel the problem. This is even earlier in the disease state, where we look at pre-ulcerative changes. A patient with diabetes and foot deformity and neuropathy that has a callus on their foot is a window of opportunity to prevent an amputation, because that callus is not there by accident, and it's not in that particular location by accident. It's there because of the way the patient walks and the way their bone structure is. And if there's a correction that we can make or an improvement in their mechanics, then we can prevent that callus from turning into a giant hole that turns into an infection, that turns into an amputation. So the equation you see in front of you here, neuropathy, so numbness, combined with elevated foot pressure from deformity, combined with the soft tissue contracture that we get from these patients that happens just from the disease of diabetes. You can be a perfectly controlled patient with diabetes and do everything right, and you're still going to get some level of change in the soft tissues. That level of change can be significant in the biggest tendon in the body, which is which tendon? Achilles tendon is the biggest tendon in the body. And the Achilles tendon has a massive influence over the foot and ankle. And if that tendon gets too tight, you're going to keep putting more and more pressure on the forefoot, under the metatarsal heads, and in the midfoot, and you're going to end up with significant deformity and a hole in the skin. So here's another great photo for those of you not in medicine. This is a patient who tragically is undergoing a partial amputation, and we're fighting here to save this leg. And if you look at it, this middle picture, just blind the left side if you're not in medicine, and look in the center now. This looks great. And the reality is that this foot has healed because of the advances in medicine. But the challenge is that if we don't do the full job, even though we brought great vascular into the picture, even though we fixed the infection, even though we fixed the significant deformity, if we don't do the whole job of looking at the mechanics, and we do the wrong surgery in the wrong patient, meaning that we haven't redesigned this foot so they can actually walk on it and use it, then this is what happens a few months later. They end up with their next ulcer. And many of you who have family members or friends who have been through diabetes or complications from diabetes know that the #1 complaint is, it started with my toe, and it went to the middle of the foot, and then it went to the ankle, and then it went to the leg, and then I lost the complete leg in an amputation. If we don't think about mechanics and think about getting these patients back to function, then we haven't done our job. So that's why this requires a team, because just fixing the blood flow is not enough. Just fixing the mechanics is not enough. Just fixing the infection is not enough. It has to be done together. An example here for you. One amputation can lead to another. In a patient who has deformity, who has neuropathy, you see that tiny spot on the bottom of the middle part of the foot? The reality is this is what it becomes within a month or two if you don't have the patient in corrective shoes or if you don't go ahead and do surgical correction of that bone pressure and that bone prominence. This patient lost their leg about 2 months later from that ulcer getting infected. So this is a pretty brutal picture, and this is the example we talk about CLI. This is a patient who has a critical need for the team now, and if we bring the team to the bedside now, and we get the vascular specialist and the infection specialist and the mechanical specialist, and we deal with this, we can save this at a midfoot amputation. If we don't get involved now, then you're going to end up losing the leg. You've got about a week or two to deal with this, or you've got to move on. We have data that tells us that teams make a difference. This is not just opinion, and this is not just something we're throwing out there, but this is some great data from Vicki Driver, published in 2005 in Diabetes Care. And what she showed, this is at Madigan Army Hospital, what she showed is that diabetes, although it was increasing, the population that they studied in 1999 to 2003, the rate of diabetes patients that they saw come through their clinic skyrocketed because the hospital started taking care of not just active duty, but also retirees. Their lower extremities actually, their amputations, LEAs, lower extremity amputations, decreased 82% over that same time that diabetes was rapidly increasing. Another key factor is that when you put a team together and you deal with amputations proactively, you can keep the amputation distal so that you're just dealing with toes or metatarsal and you're not coming up to the leg. And they found that significantly, 71% of the amputations were not a leg loss amputation. So cost of care. You can't turn on the evening news or any kind of media that's coming your way about healthcare without looking at cost and the impact and the rising cost of healthcare. Many of you probably don't realize, however, that the average hospital margin is 1.2%. It's a very, very fragile amount of money that hospitals actually have in order to keep the doors open for these facilities. So it's a very fragile environment. So you can imagine that they're looking at the cost of each patient type, and they're looking at the cost of each admission, and they're looking at how long that patient stays in the hospital and how much they can potentially recover from that cost versus how much it's going to cost them if they stay much longer. One of the key things for us is looking at the length of stay. If you look through this data set, the longest length of stay on the right-hand column, mean length of stay, 12 days. What is it? It's not the cabbage, it's not the stroke, it's not the heart attack, it's the leg amputation. 12-day length of stay. We can do way better than that. Number one, we can probably prevent the amputation if we have a team. But number two, if the team's really doing its job, even if it does go on to some level of amputation, we can do this efficiently and effectively by bringing all the specialties in concert so that we're doing these procedures at the same time. And we can cut that length of stay in half. This is the members of our Georgetown limb salvage team. We are a unique unit that truly combines the inpatient and outpatient environment. So we take up the whole first floor of the hospital on what's called the Bless building, and we have 46 employees, 12 doctors, hyperbarics, outpatient center, where people come for wound care. But then it's that same exact team that if they need a hospital admission or need to go to the operating room that day or come into the emergency room, it's all the same folks who take care of them. So we've gotten rid of the handoffs coming from one provider or coming in from an office or referrals. We certainly accept referrals from anywhere in the country, but the reality is that if they're coming into our wound care center and they need to now become an inpatient in the hospital, it's the same team that takes care of them. Data tells us that when that happens, you get between a 40 and 80% drop in the number of amputations. It's that simple to put that team together and make that communication happen. So when we have the team functioning the way it should, and we have someone come in early stage from diabetes who has neuropathy but no wound, then I can go back to my roots as a podiatrist and say, well, I can fix hammer toes, I can fix foot problems, and that's what we do for this patient. Before these pressure points ever become an ulceration, let's straighten the toes, let's lengthen the Achilles tendon, And if you look at what that means, here's 6 weeks after surgery. You can see all these calloused areas on the bottom of the foot. Here's 6 months after surgery, the calluses are gone because we've addressed the pressure, we've removed the pressure, we've evened the pressure, and the patient can walk without forming ulceration now. Here's another example, Cavus foot deformity or high arch deformity. These are severe foot types that oftentimes cause a lot of pain in persons without diabetes, but in diabetes, since you have neuropathy, you're not feeling pain, but instead of the pain, you're getting ulcerations. When these wounds break open, the pressure points are underneath the 1st and 5th metatarsals. We do a procedure called a tendon transfer and a fusion, and we combine that with a tendon lengthening, and we can get rid of these pressure points and address the Cavus foot deformity by a simple outpatient surgery with these individuals. Another example here, this is a typical diabetic foot ulceration, and if you were to debride and address this diabetic foot ulceration, you'd get to this point where you got a clean, healthy wound, but it's still not healing. And the reason is this is mechanical. This is pressure. This is not because of some type of biology problem. So we do tendo-Achilles lengthenings for these individuals. You can see here, utilizing the blade, we utilize artificial tissue grafts and put these patients into therapy afterwards. And that same wound that was non-healing for a year is now healed in 4 weeks with a tendo-Achilles lengthening, bioengineered tissue application, and appropriate offloading. If we take it one step later into the ballgame where we didn't get the chance to do the corrective hammer toe surgery, and we didn't get the chance to do the tendo-Achilles lengthening, and they come in now to the ER with an infected diabetic foot, this is where we know we need the emergent CLI team. We know we're going to lose part of this foot. We know we've got a terrible infection. We know we're going to have a big wound to deal with afterwards, but we still can save the majority of the foot and keep the patient in a walking status without requiring a below-knee amputation. So you can see here partial 4th and 5th toe amputations. We utilize artificial tissue. In this case, is a bilayered collagen graft that comes from a cow Achilles tendon that gets processed and put into a silicone layer and stapled into place. That gives us a healthy wound base that can be covered up with a skin graft, and we can save the foot. But again, mechanics, mechanics, mechanics. This can't happen in a vacuum. And the reality here is that if these toes, remaining toes, are already contracted, if we don't do something about that, we already know where their next ulcer is going to be. So if you can see here, this is a patient who's had a great toe or hallux amputation. The lesser toes, 2, 3, 4, and 5, are all contracted. If we don't address that, and they get pressure points at the tips of their toes, this is where it's going to go. They're going to end up with their next ulcer, and their next infection, and their next critical limb ischemia, and the next hospitalization. So for these individuals, instead of pushing for the major hammer toe correction, we have really found a lot of frustration in waiting for these patients to get cleared by medicine and get their blood sugar controlled enough and get to the point that they can actually go to the operating room. That can take months. And what happened over and over again from waiting for these patients to get cleared is that we lost more and more toes because the infection set in and it was too late to do the corrective procedure. So we've moved this procedure into an ambulatory bedside procedure that we do on the day of that we see these patients with toe ulcerations. You can see here from a great toe amputation, this second toe distal aspect has a contracted tendon and has a chronic ulceration. We use an 18-gauge needle. These patients have neuropathy. They don't require an anesthetic. And we use that needle to go into the base of the toe, and we find the flexor tendon much like you would pop a rubber band. We have the patient try to pull their toe down, and you're going to see me wave this needle kind of just slightly underneath the skin surface, back and forth, just using the tip of the needle as the blade. So we don't even have to use a stitch to close up this hole. This is like literally an injection hole, and you're going to see the tip of that toe pop here in just a second. So by releasing that tendon, we remove the contracture, and we get ulcer healing usually within about 2 weeks. Here's an example of patients with distal toe ulcerations, problematic wounds, 2 weeks later healed with use of the flexor tenotomy. The reality is, and I know this is another rough picture for dinner time, but the reality is that this is a very simple triad of infection, ischemia, and biomechanics. And this is the foot that you saw me amputating at the very beginning of this lecture. And it really only takes these three things and putting those together and having the right team that's passionate, like running for the school bus in the morning. If you want to run into the operating room and you want to run into your clinic and make a difference, critical limb ischemia and diabetic limb is an area that you really can do it. And here's an example of a patient with a very different outcome because the team came together. You can see a problematic wound on the left. It's not healing. They have bad blood flow. They've got infection. They've got mechanical problems. We got the team together. We debrided the wound, we went to the operating room, we got the blood flow fixed, and on the right you can see a healthy, clean, closed wound. Very different outcome than what you saw in my pretty rough video for the first slide. So to wrap things up, to modify Thomas Campbell's quote, coming events cast their shadows way, 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 way before. And if we address simple things like this, through physical therapy, through minor surgical procedures, through proper visits and follow-up, through proper prescription shoe gear, we can prevent a ton of amputations by pushing this disease state and pushing the intervention much earlier so that we don't have to be as reactionary in our treatments, because when you get reactionary in CLI, if it's too late, the reaction ends up being an amputation rather than a limb salvage. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to come speak tonight. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the health care givers, this is what we do every day. For the non-health care givers, I hope part of the message here was that awareness that this is going on, that somebody in your family may have this. There may be something that can be done sooner, quicker, and earlier, and therefore get them help. Okay? Understand those are statistics. Louisiana is number 1 or number 2 or number 49 and 50 in all good and bad in health care. And when we're talking about from the standpoint of amputations, we're among the worst. We have diabetes, we have all of those things. Now, you heard Georgetown University has 12 doctors and 48 employees on one floor taking care of this problem. Now, we don't have this in this community. Most communities, as a matter of fact, don't. But what we have in this community is the ability to do every bit of that, and we have vascular specialists working with podiatrists, podiatrists working with wound care specialists. We have that in this community. We have that sophisticated in this community, as a matter of fact. You need to be aware that it is there. Get your family members, get these patients to where they can get treatment sooner. This is the multidisciplinary approach, and this is a community problem. This is awareness. The patients will do better. This is what we want you to learn from that. So John, thank you very much. They have taken it to a different level at Georgetown. It didn't start out at Georgetown like that. It started like this, and I know when it started in Georgetown. And it has started here too, and we have this in our community. We should be proud of our health care here in our community. Guys, I'm going to have my partner, Dr. Raghu Patlola, now speak to the situation of let's connect the legs to the heart. Let's connect the legs to the heart. This is very important because you heard amputation rates, you heard those. The mortality rate, meaning when do they die, is very high. And they generally will die because of a heart problem that can often start with the leg problem. Not being dramatic, let's now address heart and legs. Dr. Patlola.
Good evening. I came to this town about 20 years back, and then when I moved into this town, the realtor said that, well, you want to be a part of this community, the first thing you have to do is to be a member of Red Reds. I said, what is Reds? You know, I was trained in New York City at Beth Israel in Manhattan. I spent my 12 years there learning cardiology, and I came to this town just because of one reason, this man next to me. I was impressed by him. I want to be like him one day, so I came all the way. The plan was to go back in 6 months because they offered me chief of cardiology. I was 31 years old. I was not confident to go back to become chief at 31 years of age. 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years, then I called them as, I'm not going to come back, I'm going to stay back here. And since then, I've been partners with my good partner and brother, Dr. Ali. He trained and taught just not me, but hundreds and thousands of doctors across the country. Before I start this talk, I also want to tell you that the term CLI, critical limb ischemia, has been coined by him. And of course, in the literature, there will be no mention about that, but I can tell you, assure you, this term has been coined by my partner, Dr. Ali. Great times in the last 20 years, I learned a lot, and I'm so honored, proud, and privileged to be a part of this community. So Dr. Ali, my partner, asked me to talk about what is the connection between the critical limb ischemia and heart. I can tell you one thing, there's a very close connection, and I'll be showing you some quick statistics. This is the old trial, Partners trial, which Dr. Ali and me have been a big enrollers of this trial. It was a simple trial. What they did was that they included patients, anybody over 70 years of age or anybody over 50 years of age who have diabetes or who ever smoked in the past. They would get one simple test, and that was called as an ankle brachial index. How many of you know about ABI? Can you raise your hands? There are quite a hands raised, okay? ABI is a very simple test wherein what we need is just a simple blood pressure cuff and a handheld Doppler. The entire instrumentation will take about $50 to buy, but that gives us tremendous information, not just about the PAD, but the overall cardiovascular health. So they did ABIs on this patient. It's a simple thing. You measure the systolic blood pressure in your arm and the systolic blood pressure in the foot, all Doppler handheld device, and the ratio between the brachial and the pedal pulses has to be 1. Anything less than 1 is considered to have PAD. When they did the simple test on this over 7,000 patients, they simply found that the prevalence of PAD, which is peripheral artery disease, is close to 30% in this population. The worst part is that most of these people are asymptomatic. And out of this 30% of the patient population, 50% of this patient had coronary disease, meaning heart disease, and they were still asymptomatic. So there's such a close connection to begin with between the heart and the legs. I'm going to show you 2 simple case studies just to wind up to get the message home. This was a patient a few years back, 40+ years old, who was referred from an outside facility from Jennings. Patient came with chest pain, had a small heart attack. They did an angiogram there, and they found that, well, this is not treatable, and he will need a surgical intervention to correct this problem. So he was transferred to our facility. Dr. Ali was the cardiovascular surgeon. Now, let me tell you, surgeons take their own time. Unless the patient is crashing or dying, they don't jump on them. So, well, he was admitted to the floors, and then the routine workup. He needs an echocardiogram to make sure his valves are okay, and he also needed some carotid ultrasound, so we did all that. So we find quite a few problems on this patient. First of all, when we did the carotid duplex examination, his left carotid was 100% occluded. He has only one right carotid. And the brachiocephalic artery, which supplies the brain, or which gives origin to the internal carotid artery on the right side, that also had about high-grade 90% stenotic lesion. And the nurses complained that they cannot get blood pressure in the arms because the brachiocephalic artery is occluded. You cannot get a prudent blood pressures in these patients. Very pleasant man, real Cajun man, always funny, spoke very high of Dr. Ali and everybody else. And he also tells me when I go there, Doc, you know, everything is good. I'm sure you guys are going to fix me up. But the problem is that I'm performing very poor in my bedroom with my wife. So he has other problem, which was erectile dysfunction. Now, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, what that means. So here we have the CT scan, and then subsequently we took this patient to the cath lab. So this is the brachiocephalic artery, which originates from the arch of the aorta, goes superiorly, bifurcates into the subclavian and the common carotid artery. So this was a high-grade lesion here. The other problem is that, as I mentioned to you, the left internal carotid artery was 100% occluded. So basically, this man is living off the right side. And the right side has a tight lesion. So despite that, it was supplying blood to the other side of the brain via the collateral flow. So this was treated with the balloon angioplasty and stenting coming from the brachial approach on the right side. And then this we had a good result. And subsequently, the angiogram of the subclavian artery on the left side, which originates from the arch of the aorta, was also, we see that very high-grade lesion here. Now, let me tell you, these are the 2 important conduits for the cardiovascular surgeons like Dr. Ali. They rely upon lima, which is the left internal memory artery, and then there's something called as rema on the right side. These arteries are supposed to supply the blood supply to the breast. But again, we don't need those arteries. It's a God-made thing. We have many other branches and collaterals. Even if we nick them off, these men or women, they tend to do fine. Their breasts don't fall off. So this conduit, which we call it as for the bypass surgery, this very important conduit is called as the left internal mammary artery. Dr. Ali can talk about it for the next 3 hours. There's a history behind it. The entire purpose of splitting somebody's chest open for a bypass surgery is this one graft, which is the left internal mammary artery. It has been consistently shown that it improves the longevity and the long-term outcomes in these patients with heart disease. Obviously, we also harvest veins from the legs and other vessels. They don't last long. 50% of these vein grafts shut down in the next 5 years. So the entire mortality benefit of splitting somebody's chest open would be this one vessel, which is the lima, where the surgeon harvests or transects it in a pedicle and then anastomoses it to the main artery of the heart, which is the widowmaker, left anterior descending artery. So this is the patient we're talking about who came in with the chest pain, found to have this lots of blockages everywhere. On top of it, when we looked at his legs were all noted to have ischemic foot ulcers with tissue loss and some necrosis. So if the surgeon wanted to harvest those veins from those infected legs, it could be a very difficult situation. So here we fixed the brachiocephalic artery, wherein the surgeon could have used the rima. We also fixed the subclavian artery, where the lima could be used. And potentially, this was treated with the balloon angioplasty and stenting, and then through the same approach, we went down. If you look at here, the distal aorta is patent, but the bilateral common iliac arteries were occluded. We recanalized both of them. And as I just mentioned, he also had some problem with the erectile dysfunction. The right side was completely occluded, but the left side had a high-grade lesion in the internal iliac artery, which was subsequently or successfully treated with the balloon angioplasty, and he tended to do well with a good sex life, which is very important. Like, men don't brag about it, but we see it very common. They talk to us, complain about it. Unless you have good blood supply going down to the private areas, no matter how much Cialis or Viagra you take, you cannot have an adequate response. So this was the final result, and he went on to have a bypass surgery. He had a rima to the right coronary artery and lima to LAD and a small vein graft to this left circumflex artery, and he left the hospital 2 weeks later with happy legs and happy life. This is a good case. This is a 41-year-old female. She's a nurse. Actually, she's here, but for particular reasons, she doesn't want to come on the podium, which I respect her. She was our holding area nurse at one of our local hospitals at Lourdes. Basically, her problem was that every time she walks more than half a block, she gets severe claudication symptoms in the legs. And it was quite debilitating. She couldn't perform her regular activities, and she would go home and chew up a bunch of narcotics and go to bed and come back to work the next day. But she has seen us performing this very complex vascular and coronary interventions. So one day she spoke to my nurse practitioner, and she said that, "You think Dr. Palola can take a look at my legs?" She said, "Yes, he will be happy to do that." I took a look at her legs right in the holding area. And what it simply needs is just 2 fingers to palpate the pulses. She has no pulses, neither in the dorsalis pedis or the posterolateral artery. She was in excruciating rest claudication symptoms. So we brought her to the cath lab 2 days later. And what we found is that her left SFA, which is superficial artery, main inflow vessel to the leg, was 100% clogged up here. And then if you go down, take some special pictures, there was no named artery which I could connect the point A to point B. But however, we connected them, and then eventually the wire was crossed, and we did some laser atherectomies and balloon angioplasty and stenting, and she went on to do well. And then she comes back 1 week later as a post-op follow-up in my clinic, and now she also complains that, "Well, I have a little chest discomfort when I walk now. Now that I've been walking more, I feel a little chest discomfort every time I walk more than half a block." So, well, this is very subtle, but again, it's so important to pay meticulous attention to a patient with a peripheral artery disease in a global fashion. It's not just about legs. You fix the leg, pat on the butt, go home, come back when you have leg pains. That doesn't work like that because it's a very complex phenomenon. Okay? Heart disease and all, we treat them. I put balloons and stents, and Ali does bypass surgeries. They tend to do well for a long time. But the problem is the legs. It's the nature of the beast. They don't last long. We have so many innovations in cardiovascular disease over the last decade, but still, these people tend to come back. There is no definitive treatment that you fix this leg, they don't come back. They do come back very frequently, very often. So these patients require very close surveillance. So we did a stress test on her, and the stress test was abnormal. We also did a carotid ultrasound on her. Again, keep in mind, she's just 40+ years old. So carotid duplex said that she has a very tight, high-grade right internal carotid artery disease, and she also had an abnormal nucleus stress test. So this was the final result, but again, we took her to the cath lab. Now, everything was okay, but this is the left circumflex artery. It's the left dominant system, which is supplying about 40% of the heart muscle. And she had a very high-grade 80–90% lesion, very hazy, which I treated it with a balloon angioplasty and stenting with a good result. Then I went up and took a look at the carotids, and this is what we find. Very high-grade 99% stenotic lesion in the right internal carotid artery. And then Dr. Ali operated on her, and she's all well. But this is not the end of the story. So that's what I keep telling them, that these people need to be monitored very closely and meticulously without a break. The problem is that we do have serious problems with several insurance companies. Most of these surveillance ultrasounds, what we say and what we do, most of the time they're not reimbursed, but we still do it in the best interest of our patients, our community, which is very important because these people can lose legs and even die from this very serious cardiovascular problems. So one thing which I would like to mention here is that pedal pulses, no cardiovascular examination is complete without auscultating a patient's carotid and without putting your two fingers on the foot. That will give you a tremendous amount of information. If there's a diminished pulse in the foot, it is a marker of not just PAD, but also in general, entire cardiovascular disease. And now, as I just mentioned, anybody whom we treat with the peripheral artery disease, we tend to address them in a global format, meaning we check their carotids, we check their abdominal aorta for aneurysms, we also check their legs, stress test, nucleus stress test. These are very pivotal in keeping these patients alive for a long time. And once you have peripheral artery disease, I can tell you no matter what, unfortunately, these people do have a very poor long-time survival. It's not just because of the legs, but in general, overall cardiovascular health, they tend not to do well. However, with close monitoring, these patients tend to do reasonably well for a considerable period of time. Now, one important thing is that, again, I stress this point, that these patients will require a long-term longitudinal follow-up. Unless you follow up these patients very closely, i.e. in terms of arterial duplex surveillance, ultrasounds of the carotids, stress test of the heart, these patients tend not to do well. Okay? So before I end, I have a few points to talk about. So this year in 2020, Dr. Ali and myself, we are honored that we are chairman of the American Heart Association Acadiana Heart Walk, which is going to happen April of 2020. It's a great organization to be a part of, and over the years, for the last 20 years, myself, and 30 years, 40 years, Dr. Ali, we have been the biggest supporters of American Heart Association. Just because of one reason, this is the largest non-profit organization which has paved the way for several major cardiovascular advances, not only in this country, but across the world. So what does, I just want to give you a quick run of what is happening in our community. In our community, almost 25% of the people die in Acadiana, greater Acadiana, because of heart attacks. 5% die from strokes. More than 50% of our community members have hypertension. They need to go to Reds, take care of many other things, which I'm going to talk about. And importantly, if you look at that, almost 70% of the people in our community are obese and overweight. And the worst thing is that at least about 35% of our kids between 10 and 12 years of age are still considered obese, which requires a lot of work not just from one individual, from a large organization like the American Heart Association. So what do American Heart Association do? What do they do? Well, they do many good things for our community, not just for our community, but the country and the world across. Important thing, what they did in our community is CPR, bystander CPR training. Just last year alone, American Heart Association has trained over 40,000 residents in this community to perform CPR on their family members or bystanders or in the restaurant or at Reds to prevent them from dying inappropriately. An important thing for me is that they support big dollar money, importantly, in supporting the scientific evidence which we and Dr. Ali or many other physicians practice in the country. They give us guidelines as to see if you do this and this to particular patients, the outcomes are good. And importantly, they also support many other initiatives in the community. They also educate lawmakers and policymakers and advise them as to what is right and what to reimburse, what not to reimburse. And they have been a generous donors, not just in this community, but across the country. But just in this community, just last year alone, American Heart Association gave about $2.5 million for cardiovascular and research in general. And so this year it's going to be on April 18th, 2020 in River Ranch Town Square. These are the pictures from last year, Dr. Ali and myself. It was a very damp day, and we expect the coming year to be dry and sunny and very good day to take part in this American Heart Association Heart Walk. So this is, I think, the American Heart Association left some cards on your tables, so try to do what you can. And importantly, if you want to be a part of this Acadiana Heart Walk, if you want to have your own team, you need to check this and then leave the cards on the table, and a little later American Heart Association members will pick it up from your table. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Palola. Take-home message, guys, is if they have disease of their legs, suspect they have disease of the heart, no matter whether they're having chest pain or not. Statistically, they do, and we should have a global picture of looking at these patients, and this is what we're trained to do. Guys, we're going to hear now from Spectrum, from Bill Watson. Bill is from California. This is a Silicon Valley company that if you've been here before, we have worked with Spectrum and their new technologies over the last nine clubs. We have presented 3 different occasions the transition of this new technology and this new molecule. It is my goal that this new molecule has a home here in Lafayette. They are a large California-based company who we believe are going to have a technology that's going to help healthcare, and he will get into some of that. We have connected this company with the university for research, connected with other industry leaders, other economic leaders in this area, with a goal for community. Community-wise, if we can have this kind of company come to Lafayette to provide healthcare, jobs, etc., this is what Bill is going to tell you about. This is a new molecule that I believe is going to have a major impact on total healthcare in this country in the next year or so. We have been involved with it for a decade. It's about to come true, and hopefully we're going to bring this home, a lot of this in Acadiana. Bill Watson from the company Spectrum.
You know, one of the things I've been doing over the last 4 years is I've been on a crash course learning about the whole world of wound care and learning about the problems that we're seeing globally in this whole issue tied to antibiotic resistance. In the last month or so, all of a sudden a place called Washington University in St. Louis has now become the benchmark for identifying how bad this problem has really gotten. And what we've saw in about the last 2 or 3 weeks is we've seen continual numbers out of the CDC and the FDA that, and I love the quotes, 23,000 people died from these things last year, and the cost is $32 billion. Well, Washington University says the real number is 160,000 in the US. It's close to 2 million people globally, and this is an absolute emergency. I just got back from Washington, D.C. I've met with some of the senior leadership in Congress. I've met some of the people at the DOD. And the reality is this is a national security issue. If you've been paying attention lately, we've seen things like the Chinese situation where they've lost over 130 million pigs, 40% of their meat supply. In 2013, they bought Smithfield Foods. Smithfield Foods is the largest pork producer in America. Do you think that if the Chinese are starving, they're going to leave that meat in our country? So the reason I've come out today, and David and I have been friends for years. We've had a close friendship, and he's been an absolute thought leader about the things that need to change in medicine as we try to provide better outcomes for patients. You know, he was really one of the guys that just told me, he goes, Billy, he goes, what I'm looking for is I need better tools in my toolbox. Well, the one thing that's important about any time you get involved in any of these vascular issues or with diabetic ulcers or burns or cancer patients that are immune compromised, infection is the problem of the death sentence. Because if you can't solve that problem, you really can't solve too much of anything else. So what we've done is we've developed a whole series of new chemistries over the last 4 years, and I'm proud to say we got our first patents issued in September. We finally have an answer to the endoscope problem with cross-contamination. Our second chemistries, basically we've created something we call hypochlorous acid oxide, which is the same chemical you find produced in a white blood cell that destroys pathogens in our body. I'm going to show you a little bit today about how big of a deal this is, because the reality is there are over 35 different superbugs in the world. We've tested about 25 of them so far, and we kill them all in very short contact times. What we intend to see happen in the first quarter of the year is that, number one, we are going to launch in the animal healthcare market in January. So when we have your next meeting in the first of the year, I'm bringing samples for everybody because we have one final test that we have to complete by the end of the year, and it's basically an injectable test where we're going to determine what kind of damage happens inside a body cavity if you just leave our solutions there for a month. And once we get through that, we'll be ready for product launch. Sports medicine is going to happen in about May, and I'm coming to see you, Red, if you're interested. We're going to make you guys the very first facility in the world where we literally don't clean it. We can sterilize everything into place, including the locker rooms, everything from the showers, you name it, we can do it. And I would love to do it if you're having interest. Number two, the wound care markets are going to open probably in about May sometime. And I'm going to show you why in a few minutes. And then a little bit later in the year, dermatology, plastic surgery, the surgical suite by the end of the year. And we're going to see this permeate coast to coast in all aspects of medicine because everybody has the same problem. If you can't get rid of the infection, it's almost impossible to heal the wound. Now, I have an interesting history story. You guys will all love this. I always love history. I'm kind of a history buff. In 1699, we invented something called hydrogen peroxide. It took about 20 years to figure out what to do with it. We realized we can kill bugs, but it was also hurting human tissue. Dakin's solution, the same thing, 1874. Penicillin, 1920. Alexander Fleming accidentally figured it out by leaving a window open in a lab, and all of a sudden he realized the bugs weren't growing in a petri dish. Took him 20 years to figure out what to do with it. The first patient took half the world's supply, and this timing is is interesting. In 1944, before the invasion of Normandy, they had 1.3 million doses for the Allied forces. When Alexander Fleming got the Nobel Prize, he told everybody, be careful how you use this because we think it will build resistance and somewhat quickly, and within 3 years we saw it. Most people don't know this, but there's been about 90 different kinds of antibiotics that have been released in the various iterations of the chemistries, and you know what they all have in common? Within a few years they fail. We think we've cracked the code. In a nutshell, and when you look at what happens inside the human body, and we basically have tried to synthesize that, we know we have the only product we have ever seen that's broad spectrum, can be put in a wound, that destroys the microbial load. It has an anti-inflammatory response. So if you have swelling in like a burn or a bad ulcer and there's pain associated with, when you knock out the histamine, as you suppress the histamines, you take the pressure off the nerves and then the pain goes away. Think about that in terms of dermatology, burn management. There's a whole host of these indications. The last couple things that we learned years ago on our first generation is we also saw some increased angiogenesis. So when we're working on a peripheral vascular disease, is angiogenesis important? If you don't get it, you're not going to heal. So we're trying to essentially use the same thing that we harnessed out of the human body and use it back in the wound bed, only it's stronger, it lasts longer, and honestly, this is new off the press. We're going to start our first animal studies. We found a solution that we think may actually be an injectable into the bloodstream, and we're going to start the research on that next. So what we've learned is when any other topical you use gets hit with a lot of blood, it deactivates it quickly. We broke the bank on that one, and we actually surpassed the expectations of our whole entire team. We don't have any toxicity. But where's this is going to go? Our problem in the emergency room or our problem in any kind of surgery isn't the fact that we have to worry about the surgical site. The patients are colonized. Everybody's colonized. The community-acquired numbers for infections, I just got back from Barbados, and I just did my first speech in front of an infectious disease society. They said about 70% of the infections down there, they bring them with them to the hospital. So the reality is in America, if you get an infection within 30 days of the hospital, they ding the hospitals, the doctors, and everybody else, and they don't want to pay them and make you treat them for free. They're colonized at home. And so it's an unfair game from the very beginning. We see this fitting in many, many applications of medicine, and over the next couple of years, we're going to try to essentially launch in those markets. Now, I just got a couple things I want to show you because I'm really proud of one in particular, is that oh, that wasn't what I wanted. I've shown this one before. Excuse me. This one I wanted to show you. This is a gentleman. Most people, and we all know, third-degree burns are almost impossible to heal without a skin graft. Well, over a period of the first 3 weeks we're to here, in 2.5 months' time, we've gone from a really nasty third-degree burn to complete healing without any antibiotics, a single debriding, and now I've got a more updated picture. It doesn't even look like there will be hardly any scarring whatsoever, and we're seeing hair regrow back into that tissue. That's pretty remarkable. I've had yet anybody not be surprised when they see this. Now, because we're launching in the animal market, we have a young lady on our team by the name of Mindy Thompson up in Kansas, and this is a little French bulldog that got flesh-eating bacteria. In 5 weeks' time, after a debriding, we've been able to go to where we have pretty close to full closure, and that dog's running around, looks completely normal. And this is the kind of thing that what we intend to do very quickly is find out what we have to do in order. Flesh-eating bacteria is a big problem. The tool is lots of debriding. That's why there's lots of amputations. We think this fits under the new Trump administration rule that allows for experimental treatment on things where people don't really have another choice. We want to be, our whole goal as a company, you tell us what the worst thing is that you're trying to deal with, and you bring it to us. Let's see if we can fix it together. My whole goal is we're a company that we basically make hardware. We basically make weapons for these guys to be able to go into the clinic and solve problems that are virtually impossible to solve so we can all do what's the most important thing in the world, which is taking care of our patients. This is kind of cool. This will launch in the spring. We negotiated a deal with the NFL Alumni Association. They're taking us into the major universities and colleges, Division I, II, III schools, the high schools, the junior high schools, with the former NFL players, both as brand ambassadors, both as introducers, and both as guys that just simply want to go to work and help us solve problems in this environment. The key is, and Red, you'll be surprised when you hear this one, in 1970, 1% of the infections were antibiotic resistant. The CDC says today 64% of them are. If you're playing, kids are playing football, basketball, baseball, wrestling, soccer, hockey, MMA, it doesn't matter what it is. It's almost more dangerous to do that than it is to go out and play on the freeway, which is what my father used to tell us to do when I was driving him nuts. My sister will admit to that. She's in the back of the room visiting from Iowa. So the bottom line is where this is going to fit and the way we see the science developing and then how we're going to create a bunch of products to come here is that, one, you got to do a potty wash. You just can't do a surgical site clean. You got to take the microbial load off the body because the body's contaminated. So are the sinuses. And then the end game is that for every surgical site infection that there is, you really have two things going on. You got to cut somebody open. You got to use a pre-op skin prep. Well, Betadine and chlorhexidine lights on fire, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Our stuff isn't flammable, and it's a lot stronger. We think we may be able to get as much as 6 to 8 hours without any kind of bacterial load growing on the wound bed. The second part of it is we want to create basically a series of shampoos that we can use, a series of products for both the eye, the ears. It doesn't really matter where it goes. And most importantly also, too, we want to do entire clean room type of environments. So when we go to disinfect something, you're using the best of breed product in the world, and your risk is going to go down dramatically. This whole thing with this African swine flu, we intend to investigate in conjunction with my old alma mater, Iowa State University. And the bottom line is that is an upper respiratory infection in the swine flu. And the reality is we haven't had many cases here yet, but I will tell you they killed 5 million chickens last year. They're all respiratory-driven kind of illnesses in Iowa, just tied to the avian flu. And you're looking at a guy that survived it in 2006. And so we know this stuff works in the lung. We're going to explore that. And all we really do is we change our chemistry depending on where we have to put it in the body. This will be the product you guys will see in January. My lovely bride I just got married in August, she designed this and did a beautiful job. But this is our product called Vetricept. And again, we will have about 7 or 8 different product lines that will go into that market. Our collaboration partners not only will be Iowa State because they're one of the biggest in agriculture in the world, but we want to work with UL Lafayette. We've met them for a while. They've got the most fabulous primate program in the world, and obviously LSU has a pretty big vet school as well, and we're going to be going to see them shortly, and we want to have them collaborate with us. And the key is, and I want to really make this clear, we have had such an incredible amount of help out of this community. Of the money we've raised almost all over the country, 20% of it, 25% of it came from right here from this town. We're going to use Lafayette, Louisiana as our launch point. So whether it's animal health care or peripheral vascular disease management or being able to do things to help disinfect the ventilators, the CPAP machines, it doesn't matter what it is. We're going to start here and then spread from this area. We're seriously considering putting a manufacturing plant here in town. We could easily add 200 or 300 jobs to this community. And one of the people I'd like to introduce, and I'd like Richard to stand up, is a lot of you guys know Richard Zimmer. Richard Zimmer was probably, I consider him one of the greatest sales and marketing experts that I've ever known. If you guys remember Fox Hollow Technologies, he built that and what led their sales organization. And that became a company that started from nothing and went all the way to $2.5 billion in less than a few years for one reason and one reason only. They figured out that if they go below the knee and start to revascular, they can save limbs. And that's where David Alley and Raghu and Dr. Steinberg, they all know that these tools are critical for us to be able to make a difference. All I'm trying to do with everybody is give you the final weapon, which will be able to knock out that microbial load, destroy it, help with a little additional blood flow into the wound bed, and by having a vasodilative effect, we got better blood flow, and we get more white blood cells delivered to the wound tissue, and we heal these wounds better. And then, in a nutshell, we've been assembling, I think, some of the greatest people in the country to come help us do this. And I have this saying that I like to use a lot. If you're going to go start a world war, you need an army. So we're building one. And so, in addition, Dr. Alley not only was our first shareholder, but he also has been leading the charge and pointing me in all the right directions to make sure we figure out how to do this the right way. Paul Arwaters, the head of infectious disease at Johns Hopkins. Ed Septimus was head of HCA. Jerry Stonemetz is head of all the surgeries at Hopkins. Dr. Kinchin's involved locally. Dr. Harkless is involved locally. We've got great people, and this is only half the list. We're going to make a difference. And it's like we all talk about living a life well lived. My only goal, now that I'm getting to be an old-timer here, I want to leave a print that says we solved one of the biggest problems in medicine. And I never had the luxury of going to medical school when I was a kid. This is the closest I'm going to get, but it's going to let me have a real opportunity to help change this on the behalf of all of you, all of the medical community. We've got great dedicated people at our company that live and bleed this every single day. And what I ask to all of you is we're coming to town soon. We're going to start to bring this stuff out of stealth mode, and we want you to help us change history. So I don't have anything else to say except for there's only been one mistake done all night long. Dr. Steinberg should have made Dr. Alley wear that Washington hat for a week. Anyway, thank you guys all. I appreciate being here. Thank you all.
Play ball. Guys, nutshell here is this is a liquid form that kills all bacteria, viruses, fungus, spores, and infection. And that's what this technology is. And so if you just think about where you can use it, the answer is everywhere. Because infections are everywhere. We know more about this today than we did 10 years ago. And in every healthcare field, whether in also in every fitness, every child's school. As a matter of fact, your building, as a matter of fact, my new center, I'm hopeful, is the first medical facility that is treated and is sterilized before a person walks in the door. That is what could happen, and hopefully some of that's going to happen here. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a long and great agenda from my standpoint. I hope everybody in the room has learned something, has taken a little bit of time, have thought about what red has meant, has heard some of the future, and know that this came at our nonprofit CLI club. I want to tell you that within the last 2 months, we have had sub-chapters that are opening, mimicking this in Santa Fe, Tulsa, San Antonio, McAllen, and there's probably another several more. So this is getting out. There is a reason for it because it's touching a community. Not one limb, not one heart, not one profession, but actually putting everybody together and dealing with it as a community on a healthcare and a non-healthcare basis, on a spiritual basis, on an economic basis, on things that make your community better. Red, what an honor to be able to honor you tonight. I want to thank our staff for putting this on. I want to thank also all of our sponsors. It's late, short on housekeeping, good on content. January 23rd, we will be having, again, our next meeting, if you would put that up. We talked about this earlier. We'll be honoring Dr. Kip Schumacher. I would suggest everybody look at your emails. We will be in touch with you. We would love for you to attend this. Dr. John Rady will be speaking again. This is fitness of the brain, fitness of the vascular system, what it means actually from the older to the younger population. We have some hint that our younger school-age kids are going to benefit from this too. Better fitness, better humans, better community. Guys, I'm going to all of us to give us a hand. Drive home safely. Thank you for all your support in 2019. That's been 5,000 attendees. We'll see y'all in 2020. Thank you.